The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
I've actually been in uniform for most of my life. Of course, in England, in the 1950s and 60s, school children wore uniform, and my father, being a regimental sergeant major in the Royal Military Police, was very big on the proper wearing of uniform. So by the time I was 5 years old, I was into school uniform. At 13, I was enrolled in a naval academy, and of course that was run by the Admiralty, so we dressed as sailors all the time, 24/7. I went from that naval academy to a naval college, and by the time I was almost 17, I was at sea. My naval career was somewhat abbreviated by an accident aboard ship. And so it was while I was sitting in a convalescent home in the south of England feeling sorry for myself, I looked out of the window and I saw a bobby strolling by, just whistling to himself. I thought, wow, look at him. 3 squares a day, salary, uniform, roof over his head. Not much to do by the looks of things, and all day in which to do it. I'll have me some of that. So as soon as I was fit and able, I went out and applied to join the Surrey Constabulary, the police force in whose jurisdiction I was recuperating. Yes, I served with Surrey for 4.5 years, but even after about 3, I started to get itchy feet. My father, having been the soldier I already mentioned, later became a diplomat, and so we, the family, had no fixed abode really, and we spent most of our time traveling to different places around the world. So just for lack of anything else to do, I happened to notice that the Bermuda police had been advertising at that time for experienced police officers, by which they meant trained, I think, because I wasn't spectacularly experienced at 3-4 years, but nonetheless, they were looking for candidates, and in their infinite wisdom, they accepted me, and let me think, that would be February of 1975, I arrived in Bermuda to start a 5-year contract there. I first encountered Canadians in any context outside the diplomatic corps in Bermuda, where I was stationed in Western Division, which was also home to the Canadian Forces Station, a small naval base. And I don't know, just because of my military connection, if you will, I gravitated to that base and the mess and became something of an honorary Canadian, I suppose, by association. And during that time, a young lady came down from Canada to visit some of her family members who were stationed in Bermuda there with the Canadian Forces. So I met my Canadian wife-to-be on the beach at the Canadian Forces Station in Bermuda in 1976. It was thanks to my wife that I ended up in Canada. She was then a student nurse, and job opportunities were non-existent for Canadian student nurses in Bermuda. Even once she had graduated, they could afford, as did the police force, to pick and choose for experienced candidates. So if I'd stayed in Bermuda, if we had stayed in Bermuda when I married her, she wouldn't have had a job anyway. So I agreed to break the contract with the Bermuda police and moved to Canada to marry her. Well, when I arrived in Canada, I clearly wanted to be a police officer. That was my calling. So I came up on a sort of exploratory visit about a year before I arrived permanently, so that I could make some inquiries about joining the police force. Now, coming from England, I had no real notion of what the police force was in Canada other than that which I had seen in the movies. If I'm in Canada and I want to be a policeman, obviously I have to be a Mountie. Even though at that time, Monty Python's famous "he's a lumberjack" or "I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay" was still fresh in everybody's mind. So I made those inquiries at the RCMP recruiting office in Ottawa, where my wife-to-be, my then fiancée, lived, and was told that I would be eminently acceptable with my background. So a year later, I arrived in Canada and got married in August of '77 and went straight back down to the RCMP office, where I presented myself for application. They handed me a bunch of papers. I filled out the paperwork. And when I turned it back in, they looked through them all and then said, "Well, hang on a minute, you've missed a bit. You haven't filled this out." I said, "What?" He said, your Canadian citizenship number." I said, I'm not a citizen, I'm a British subject." "Well," they said, "you have to be a Canadian citizen to join." I said, "Well, why is this the first time you've mentioned it? Because you didn't say anything about this before." And the response was, "Well, of course we mentioned it." I said, "No, I made a point of coming up here all the way from Bermuda, and I think I would remember that important aspect of our conversation, don't you?" And the recruiting guy took a bit of a backpedal there and said, "Well, actually, when you came, it was okay. You could either be a British subject or a Canadian citizen. But in the years since you've been here, that law has changed," which I long since learned was just a bit of patent double talk by a guy who got caught in his own misinformation. Disappointed as I was anyway, I left. But in any case, I had some friends in Ottawa who had friends. It's the way things were done, of course, much more so than today, though not exclusively. And I was able to secure a position with the Gloucester Police Force, which was a municipal force in the suburbs of Ottawa, which I started in December of 1977. And to bridge that little gap between August and December, I worked as a casual correctional officer at the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre in, again, the suburbs of Ottawa. Actually, it was in Gloucester, which proved to be a bit of a bonus because I worked there full-time casual for 3 months or so and was placed as a wing officer on a low security wing. And it turned out that the area I was to patrol as a Gloucester policeman was the area in which that jail sat. And for the first year or so after I assumed my duties, I knew all of the inmates that were in and out of there and living in the local area, some of whom didn't recognize me as a policeman in different contexts. So when they were handing me their fake names and addresses, I'd let them hang themselves before I reminded them of who I was and where we had met before. It was pretty sweet. As soon as I did obtain my Canadian citizenship, which was like three and a half years later, I trotted quickly back down to the RCMP because I had never actually lost sight of wanting to join Canada's iconic and national police force. Gloucester was great fun, and it was a pretty good small city police department, but it was still just that. In fact, Ottawa Carleton district at that time, the whole national capital region, was quite fragmented, and in that large conurbation, there were 11 different police jurisdictions, none of whom even spoke to each other on a daily basis. So I resolved that I wanted to be part of the bigger picture, the national police force. And so I went back and said to the RCMP, well, I'm here. Do you still want me? And they said, oh gosh, yes, with your naval background, we could use you. I had been in Bermuda on the Marine Division too. We could use a guy like you on the Marine Police with your navigation skills and seamanship and Marine Police. Boy, let's go, sign here. And so in June of 1982, I arrived in Regina to undergo basic training. Notwithstanding my 12 years as a policeman, the RCMP, of course, adhered to its dictum, the right way, the wrong way, and the RCMP way. And so they didn't really care where I'd been trained or by whom. I wasn't even eligible for what was then called modified training, which was a system whereby police officers from other police departments in Canada would get a sort of accelerated introductory training to the RCMP's way of doing things. It was like an oil change and a tune-up for me. In that era, a troop had 24. We were just one of the first troops to have 24 men in the troop. And ours was very quickly 23. The guy that was sworn in with me in Ottawa elected to drive to Regina with his girlfriend. So it took him 3 days. And when he arrived, he was given his bedding and escorted to the barracks. When he saw our dorm in B basement north, he turned apparently to his escort and said, well, wait a minute, where's my room? And when they said, this is it, buddy, he promptly turned around and headed back to the guard room and told his girlfriend, don't leave yet, I'm coming with you. So we were now 23, Troop 6 of 1982-83. And I was the oldest guy on the troop, and I was 30. Everyone else, not everyone else, but the overwhelming majority were between 19 and 22. And there were 2 or 3 others who were in their, shall we say, mid-late 20s, but only 2 or 3. It was a different time, of course. I remember my introduction to the drill instructor. Who doesn't remember their introduction to the drill instructor? Quite clearly, though, he, Corporal Pierre Belanger at the time, I say corporal at the time, he retired as an inspector many years later. Corporal Belanger had clearly been briefed on who's who in the troop. And at the time that I came through depot, I was, in that era, one of very few recruits who were, shall we say, shared my speech impediment. My British accent was what it is. And I, it turned out, had a peer at depot. Going through in another troop was another British-raised but Canadian-born member, Mark Linnell. And Mark had been in the Royal Marines for 12 years and had grown up in Britain as a Canadian-born overseas, I guess, and then made his way to Canada and joined the RCMP. Mark and I, to the untrained ear, sounded the same, though he was from a different part of Britain. And superficially, we even resembled each other. We had similar receding hairline, and in those days, the issue moustache, and our build was very similar. And Mark was about a month from the end of training. And he had been ridden hard because of his Royal Marines background, I suspect. They wanted to see how tough the Marine really was. And most of it then had just rolled off him like water off a duck's back. So I suspect that by then the staff had already grown tired of the game, so they were fed up. And I didn't really get, perhaps, quite the same rough ride. But on day 1 of drill, Corporal Belanger called the roll. And when it came to my turn, he called, Smedley. And I said, Corporal. And he looked up from the board and looked across and said, are they sending us clones now? Suffice it that I simply said, Corporal, and carried on with the rest of the 6 months of training. I don't think I received any special attention, and I did find much of the training, particularly the police aspects of it, very straightforward. In fact, not particularly challenging. The physical side was very challenging for me. I was in good shape, but nonetheless, I was 30 and they were 19, and I'd grown kind of accustomed to my beer and my cigarettes, more so than the younger guys. I was expecting a posting to somewhere on the coast. Given everything that had been said about my maritime background. And of course, we were asked to put in our wish list before graduation from depot of the 3 places we most would prefer to go. So I listed, I don't recall the order, but certainly I listed at the time, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, British Columbia. Why not? Staffing informed me in the staffing interview prior to graduation that British Columbia E Division was closed at the time, as was Newfoundland. And I couldn't go to Nova Scotia because my wife was from Nova Scotia. I said, well, wait a minute. My wife isn't from Nova Scotia. She's from now Ontario. That's where we settled, where she was from when I met her. He said, no, she's born in Nova Scotia, so that rules that out. And you can't go to Ontario because that's where you're from. I said, I've only been in Canada 10 minutes. I don't actually have a home. Whatever, where am I going? Well, where they decided my marine skills would be best used was 𝐻𝑒 Division, Alberta. And my first posting was to an army garrison town in Wainwright, Alberta, not far from the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. I didn't really get to use those marine skills of mine for the first 7 years of training of my career in the RCMP. With the RCMP, I was mostly in 𝐻𝑒 Division for the first 15, 16 years. I say mostly because during the time that I was there, first, as I say, almost 7 years in Wainwright, and followed by staffing's other little joke. Okay, now that you've done an army base in the middle of the prairies, let's take your marine navigation skills to Edmonton International Airport. So I spent almost 3 years there, but during that 3 years, I was very fortunate and feel very privileged to have been selected among many volunteers to go to Namibia as part of the RCMP's first excursion into United Nations peacekeeping operations. And that was in 1989. Policing as a member of the UN peacekeeping contingent was going to be very different from the sort of thing that any of us up till that time had experienced. The contingent was 100 members strong, 96 men and 4 women. And our mandate, by and large, was to supervise the local police force, the fledgling police force in Namibia, in its first few months of existence, simply to monitor it for good policing practices and to ensure that there were no human rights abuses taking place, and to assist them in creating a stable environment for free and fair elections that would take the former South African colony of Southwest Africa, as it was called, to independence as Namibia in early 1990. So we didn't have any enforcement powers. And another aspect that was foreign to all but me in our contingent was that we weren't to be armed, even though Namibia was a more or less stable and secure environment at the time. But there were incidents, even when we were there, where bombs were dropped and hand grenades were thrown, and of course small arms were employed. But our mandate was simply to watch and supervise and report on the response to those sorts of threats by the local police. As for arriving in Africa, with one or two other exceptions within the contingent, I was one of those few who had ever been to Africa before. One of my father's postings, the first one when he left the army and joined the Foreign Service, the British Foreign Service, was to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania in East Africa. And we kids were pulled out of boarding school for this great adventure and went to live in Tanzania for the first 6 months of my father's tenure there. So I attended school, albeit at a fairly young age. I was 11 at that time. But throughout my dad's career, until I left home at effectively at 17, so for 5-6 years, we traveled to the places where my parents were, and I was quite used to living in those different environments. We lived in India, we lived in Pakistan, we lived in Europe and elsewhere. So for me, it wasn't such a huge shift as it was for other members of the contingent. Of course, the biggest problem for most of them was passing the driver's test within the first week, because in Africa, everybody there drives on the left and rather than on the right. So I passed the test, no problem. I had a second trip with the United Nations in 1995 when stationed at Fort McMurray Detachment. While I had been earlier at the airport detachment, when I came back from Africa, once again in search of something else that would expand my career opportunities, I underwent French language training and did so well, if I may be allowed to say so. I came out with a very high level of bilingualism. I won the grand prize of a posting to Fort McMurray, a city then of 35,000 people with perhaps 300 francophones who daren't speak French in public, I don't think, in wild and woolly Fort McMurray in northern Alberta at the time. Nonetheless, I was selected from K Division's candidates to go to Haiti in February of 1995, much to the chagrin of some of the other members who had applied. One or two at Fort McMurray were particularly put out, and one of them said to me in the coffee room, "How come you get to go? You've already been on one of these missions." To which I couldn't resist replying, "Yeah, but this time they're only sending us Frenchmen." When I returned from Haiti in 1995, I was called by staffing and asked if I was still interested in a posting to depot, which I had put in for more than once over the years. And when I said, well, yes, of course, they informed me that there was a position open for a bilingual member in the driving unit at depot, and that I was to present myself then for an interview board. The structure had just been adopted by the force that an exam had to be taken. I had taken that exam, got the requisite mark, and was flown to Vancouver because though it was now 1996, early 96, the Cycle 1 board had been dissolved in K Division. So did I mind going to British Columbia because they still had a board? I was being asked this. I'm sorry, it wasn't 96. It was November of 95. I said, I don't know, let me think. Fort McMurray, November 95, a weekend in a nice hotel for a Monday morning appointment in Vancouver. I'll take it. Happily, I was selected to come to depot, and I served as a driving instructor for 3 years or so, and during which time I was also cross-training as a drill instructor, and then was given a troop, one of several, of course, but that presented itself for its first hour of drill on the 12th of May, 1999, Troop 3 of that year. I remember it well. I call it the fall of 99, although it was only May. And basically what happened was that, terrified as they were, I had sized the troop and formed them into two ranks. But of course the rear rank was far too close to the front rank. And I aligned myself alongside the right marker and informed everybody on the troop, who could only listen but not look at me, a head and eyes front, that henceforth the distance between the two ranks would be 3 paces. And 3 paces will look like this. And I set out to march off the 3 paces. 1, 2, and what should have been a nice sharp 1, 2, terminated with a loud crash, because on that halting movement, I slipped on the drill hall floor, landed very awkwardly. 180 pounds of me landed on my right knee, which was directly underneath my body. It destroyed the knee and robbed me ultimately of the dynamic function of my right leg. I can't to this day hop, skip, jump, run. But on that day, the troop didn't know what was going on. They just heard this clatter. There was a second drill instructor on the floor, so he ambled over that. In those days too, the troop actually had a videographer videoing their first drill class and all the milestone events in training. So I have the video of the first 5 minutes of their drill class. And it shows the other drill corporal, who shall remain nameless, stroll over and look down at me rather sort of bemused, like, what are you doing down there? And apparently, I don't recall doing it, but I looked up at him, and in fine British stiff upper lip tradition, and of course of the mounted police, I said, I believe I've hurt my knee. Please carry on, Corporal. So he said, very well, and carried on with the class. Meanwhile, others had come down from the bleachers. There were other instructors there. The drill sergeant of the day was there, Bob Stewart, and a colleague from the driving unit was also sitting up there, and Greg Crawford. They came down to assist me. I had now already made myself famous with the carry-on corporal remark. The next thing I did apparently cemented my reputation around the base, because of course they wanted to get me off the floor while this class was going on around me. And I had visions of having to go to hospital and have my highbrows removed, and that meant